All right, everybody. My name is Michael Bunker. This is the Bunker Nation. Welcome to the show. This is one of our How to Think episodes. This is recorded and it is not live. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Welcome to the Bunker Nation. My name is Michael Bunker. We are here, and I'm going to be your host for the afternoon. It's actually only going to be a little while. Got a topic I want to talk about today as part of our How to Think series, where I go through commonly used tactics, sophistical tricks, logic fallacies, etc., that are used to persuade, propagandize, and to trick people into perhaps accepting things that are false or untrue. All of those things wrapped into one. And so basically this series, How to Think, usually I take an example of something or something that's happened or some argument that's going on in the zeitgeist, and I use those to examine the elements of it. Now, let me tell you, you can do this without taking a position on a particular topic. If somebody says something, or a political position, perhaps about taxes or something, you can actually discuss or point out fallacies in their reasoning, or use those to teach fallacies in reasoning, or how to identify fallacies in reasoning, without making a political position or a decision on what the particular topic is. This is one of the things that's completely lost in American discourse today. People think that because you think they came to their conclusion using faulty logic, and you can prove it, you can absolutely prove it, that somehow you're on the other side. This is this whole dialectical thinking that's been forced on Americans, particularly in the West, that if you disagree with the way something's happening, or you disagree with somebody lying, or somebody saying something that's untrue, or using fallacious reasoning, that somehow you are from the party of the other side. And we have talked about this in my discussions on gish galloping and the Brin bundling, where there's this packaging in people's minds where everybody who disagrees with them on one topic falls into this cardboard cutout of the others, and you can then attribute all of the other attributes that you've concocted for the others and attach it to that person. So I want to warn you beforehand that's my other camera going off. To be wary of that sort of thing. Don't think that because I'm saying this particular thing you're saying is not true, or this thing you're saying is fallaciously reasoned, that somehow I'm taking a position on the thing. My position on most of these points is known, but I just want everybody to try to continue to use reason and logic and understanding, as I'm merely teaching how to identify tricks and such that are used against you all day, every day in social media and the news and all this kind of thing. All right, today is a little bit more difficult one, because we're going to talk about what I'm calling the Forbes fallacies. This has changed over the last year or so. I used to call the Forbes fallacy the practice that my good friend Forbes West uses of basically dumping a whole bunch of things, including just a bunch of garbage. It's like dumping garbage in your front yard, trying to cover up the fact that he doesn't know something or that he's wrong about something. And so basically, if you want to discuss something or if you want to debate it, you have to go through this entire litany of other stuff that's completely unrelated, that's false, or that's stupid, or that's a joke. And there's so much of it, you just don't do it. Since then, we have learned that there's actually a title for that. It's called gish galloping. And so we're using the proper term for that fallacy. The fallacy that I'm now calling the Forbes fallacy is more a subset of a fallacy called poisoning the well, along with some crossover fallacies. Basically, it is this, and I'm going to get to the basics of it first, and then we'll get into detail. The basics of it is this. You can take advantage of both sides of any argument merely by taking control over the entire history of any quotes ever used by anybody at any time. For example, if you are for or against the Second Amendment, you go and find a quote that is indicative of your position, and you use that, and you post that quote, and then if somebody comes in and says and begins to challenge that, then you come in and you can drag in other quotes that are out of context to defeat it. There's a whole lot of layers to this. The other thing is, if somebody else quotes anybody, for example, like I said in the Second Amendment, if somebody else quotes perhaps Ronald Reagan, you go out and find a quote where, and they do exist, where Ronald Reagan, in specific instances, in specific context, voiced an opinion that most people who are pro-Second Amendment would disagree with. The whole thing boils down to this: if you are not willing to accept everything that somebody ever said on any topic, then that can be used against you when somebody's using the Forbes fallacy. So we're going to get into some pretty strict details so you understand how this works, because it's kind of confusing at the front. The basis of it is the misuse of quotes, or the abusing of people through quotes, and trying to take advantage of both sides of the issue so that you can never lose. All right, so let me tell you, for those of you who don't know who Forbes West is, Forbes West is a good friend of mine. We are good friends. We've worked together. We talk, if not daily, every couple of days. We have a lot of great conversations. We've spent time together in person. I consider him my friend, although we have polar opposite positions on a whole lot of things. He is very valuable to me, not only as a friend, but also because he's wrong on just about everything. He also has never learned how to argue correctly or properly or with intellectual honesty. And because of that, he's valuable to me because I can use him as a continuous source of teaching other people what not to do or what to see when somebody else is doing. And so he has lots of value to me, and I appreciate Forbes. If you're out there, Forbes, I love you, and I do appreciate the content. All right. So that said, much like G.K. Chesterton used many of his very close friends as examples of what not to do or what not to think, I use Forbes in a very similar way. What started this all off today, and I understand that some of you don't like the Forbes-centric videos. I don't really care whether you do or not, because I need to use the best examples if I'm trying to teach somebody how to think. So what happened today, or last night, I guess, is I posted a small post that basically asks the question, what is it called when government engages in a massive education effort? The context of this is that, and I don't want to get into the words that are going to get me blackballed on YouTube, was that the government is planning, and there was an announcement yesterday that there's going to be a huge plan to engage in a massive education effort on a topic. And I wanted to warn people to start looking for it. What does that mean? And so I said, what is a one-word definition for government engaging in a massive education effort? And almost everybody got it right in some form or another. They use the word propaganda, indoctrination, etc. Forbes took the opportunity to not answer the question. The specific question was a single word definition, but instead try to use my wall to propagandize people using false information. And so let me tell you how he did that. The first thing he did is he posted, he says, I'm not going to use one word, but basically it's public education, which he considers to be a good thing, a beneficial thing. And so then he quotes Thomas Jefferson, who prior to the advent of widespread public education was a very big advocate of it. All right. So although that has nothing to do with the point, has nothing to do with my post, Forbes thought that he was making a point here. And his point here is that in his mind, public education has done a great good, and therefore what we're talking about, which is taking a particular issue at which the corporations and the oligarchs and the government wants to shove things down people's throat, and saying we're going to engage the public using these platforms, these commercial platforms, to indoctrinate people and propagandize them about a particular topic. Somehow that's the same as teaching children how to read and write and basic history and math, which is the stuff that Thomas Jefferson was for. I replied, First of all, Thomas Jefferson himself was not publicly educated, and yet at the age of 14 or 15, he was the ambassador to France. He also spoke a handful of languages and translated the Bible, albeit heretically, himself. All right, so this was not a guy who needed public education, and we understand that by public education, what he considered to be the importance of education was teaching basics on what I'm doing here, how to think, not telling people what to think or picking out some goal or some idea that government wants to propagandize people with and say, okay, we're going to spend your tax money and we're going to use corporations and social media and all these things to train people to think a certain way, to what to think. That was nowhere on his plate. Likewise, people like James Madison, who, in order to enter college, he was also not publicly educated, to enter college when in his early teens, had to be able to quote from any book then extant, and also in any of three languages, English, Hebrew, or Greek. Forbes replied that I somehow had gotten this off of Wikipedia, even though I hadn't even opened Wikipedia. You guys know I do this show with no notes. I don't sit there on Facebook and Google stuff and all that kind of stuff. I do things because I've read books, and I've read some of the best Madison biographies that are out there. Any notes that I have are like this. That's it. You can't even read them. This was from one of my last videos. There were 3 questions that were specifically asked to me that I couldn't remember verbatim, so I wrote them down. And then there's a couple of topics I wanted to remember. One of them was talk about the super chat here on YouTube so people could donate. The second one was, or the first one was tell people about my fitness channel. And the third one was about coffee. All right, so I don't sit here on Google or Wikipedia, which is what Forbes does, and talk about things I don't know anything about and spew them out. And I know this personally because I've been in Forbes' presence, and he doesn't have the capacity to sit there, other than cultural references, 70s and 80s movies and things like that, which he's very, very good at. He's good at Japanese culture. He's good at remembering what movie a quote came from that was in the 90s. He's good at remembering a particular 80s model car. He's good at all those kind of things, and he's fun to be around and hang out with. However, if we were sitting here having a debate about anything political or anything social without having direct access to a computer, he's completely worthless and he gives in quite easily. So here's the thing. He uses this quote, this Jefferson quote, despite the fact that over the last 5 years, he has on numerous occasions, anytime anybody else ever quotes Jefferson for any reason, merely stated that Jefferson was a rapist and a slaver, and therefore we're to assume what he means by that is that he ought to be disregarded in anything that he said that was true. And so I'm not here to defend Jefferson, I'm not here to defend slavery, and I'm not here to defend rape, although we are going to discuss some of those things and how they're being used. The question is the fact that nobody else is allowed to use a Jefferson quote in the context in which it was used. For example, Jefferson's strong support of the Second Amendment, Jefferson's strong support of the use of armed revolution if necessary, for the redress of grievances if necessary, and those things. And anytime anybody brings those things up, then we have Forbes bringing up the fact or the idea that this slaver and this rapist, that's what he is, so he ought not be listened to in a particular context that has nothing to do with that. He's done this with Jefferson. He's done this with Ronald Reagan. He's done this with several people. And Solzhenitsyn is another one. And so what he's done is in his mind, because he's self-deluded, he has captured both sides of any argument. He's allowed to use Jefferson, and he's allowed to use him however he wants, because he can pull a quote off of WikiQuotes or wherever he gets it without any context, and he can use that quote and get it wrong, and you're not supposed to say anything about it. But if you use a quote, for example, that the tree of liberty must be watered from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants, you're going to get a response about how you're somehow supporting some slaver and some rapist. And so this is intellectually dishonest. I don't have a problem with somebody that's wrong. I have a problem with somebody who's dishonest. He's doing it on purpose, and he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's being dishonest. Let me show you some examples. Here is a Forbes. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Here's a Forbes response. My son had posted something about freedom in the Second Amendment. And Forbes here comments, because white males in an organized militia system existing during the royal colony era rose up against the crown and fought for rights, and that's a good thing because they were better than the royalists. But even Thomas Jefferson, who raped a slave constantly, said society needs to keep up with bettering itself instead of shackling itself to the past. And then he goes on. And what he always does is you get 3 or 4 posts saying the exact same thing, because what he wants to do is he wants to spread out the data you have to deal with. Now, the specific quotes that he used from Jefferson say nothing about him changing his mind, or at some time in the future there ought not be a Second Amendment, or sometime in the future there ought not be a mechanism for people to defend themselves against the caprices of a tyrannical government. In no way did anything he ever write ever hint towards any of that. His idea that as society begins to progress and as things begin to change, that there might need to be a change in government or a change in laws is something that's accepted by every reasonable person. And it's something Jefferson talked about. He was not talking about the fact that, yes, we used guns to throw off the tyranny of the English, and that was good according to Forbes, but now nobody else should ever be able to do that again because we've progressed in our ideas as a culture. That was nowhere in Jefferson's mind or his writing at all. So this is just a dishonest use of a Jefferson quote. The same, and he also mentions in that quote that this guy was a rapist and raped someone constantly. Something that he could not prove in a million years if he had to do it in court. And I'll get to that point in just a minute. Okay, so this is what happens. If you use a Jefferson quote, he's going to introduce information that has nothing to do with the topic, has nothing to do with the Second Amendment, has nothing to do with the idea of revolution. And by the way, Forbes is a hypocrite because he participates in the Cal-Exit idea that California ought to have a revolution and ought to be independent. He's also a Marxist, and so he believes in worldwide worker revolution. He also believes in this in the use of guns in revolution because he knows it and I know it, and we talked about those things. And so he's just a hypocrite. He just doesn't want anybody who holds to a Jeffersonian idea of freedom and liberty in America to have the same right, or to be able to use that right or to speak about that right publicly without admitting that they support slavery and rape. All right, here's the second one. This is him posting on his own page where he uses a quote from Jefferson: "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery." Forbes says, "Now fetch me another wine, Sally." And yes, I'm totally unaware of how this comes across. This is his way of saying this guy ought not be listened to because he's a rapist, because Sally is the one that he is allegedly raped. Let me deal with that just for a minute. Again, I'm not defending Jefferson. I'm not defending rape. And I'm not defending anything else of the matter. I'm defending the argumentative style and the intellectual dishonesty. The fact is that this whole idea that his slave was raped by Thomas Jefferson. Let me walk you through the process to which this conclusion was reached by many in the left. First of all, there was a DNA test, and the DNA test proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that somewhere in the line between Sally's line and Jefferson's line, there was a cross, and that there was very high likelihood that there was copulative acts between the two lines. There was never, ever any definitive proof that the person involved in that copulative act was Thomas Jefferson. In fact, it very well likely could have been his brother. We don't know, and Forbes doesn't know, and that's not the argument. But here's what happened next. After this idea that the descendants of this slave woman were also descended from Thomas Jefferson, the idea that he had sex with her, and he might have, there's no way for us to know. We weren't there, where there's no eyewitnesses. The proof level in both rape cases and copulative cases in court is much, much higher than the fact that some descendants, some dozen generations later, have the same DNA. They have to actually prove that the two engaged in the act, which is not possible to prove. It's absolutely not possible to prove. All we can prove is that somebody in Jefferson's family and somebody, and most likely her, had sex. That's what we know. So the next step in the leftist ideology is no sex between a person of power and a person without power can be considered non-rape. So all sex between any two people in which one of the person holds some type of political or social power and the other person is an underling or somehow serves under them is actually rape. What we don't know is that there was a lack of consent in any sex that took place, even though we don't know it was Thomas Jefferson. It very well could have been, and it very well could have been forced. I'm not defending Thomas Jefferson. I'm defending logic and reason. All right? So now we have 3 steps that have been used to now have Forbes get on my wall and say it's an absolute fact that the man, Thomas Jefferson, forcibly raped this slave, and he did so constantly. These things we don't know. They are not provable. There's not enough evidence to ever prove that in a court, and that's what he knows. So that being said, I don't care. In other words, not that I don't care that somebody might have been raped, although I disagree with all the steps that came to that conclusion. I don't care whether or not something that happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago that has nothing to do with the topic. I don't care. It's a distraction, and it's an element called poisoning the well. Let me give you another example. I personally don't like the leader of the GOP in the Senate, Mitch McConnell. Don't like him at all. I don't like what's going on right now with the stimulus blocking and all that kind of stuff. I'm not defending Mitch McConnell. However, there's a joke. There's a meme where we call Mitch McConnell Cocaine Mitch. How did that come about? Well, a company 3 steps removed from it, in other words, it was his wife's family's company. His wife is Asian. They owned a shipping company to which they were somewhat separated from. They just owned some type of interest in it. And one ship was caught with like $7 million of cocaine on it. Because of that, the innuendo is that Mitch McConnell himself was involved in cocaine smuggling. Yeah, and so this happens daily, this type of innuendo and slander, and Forbes is an expert at it. He's an expert at it. So I'm just using these as examples of how this reasoning, which becomes 2, 3, 5, 7 steps from anything we actually know, becomes declared as an absolute fact and accepted de facto because these people assume and expect and rely on the audience being stupid and not knowing the facts or not knowing how these things came to be. All right, so here we are. Forbes, who has captured Thomas Jefferson as his own property. In other words, he is permitted to use Thomas Jefferson quotes, even out of context, even if those things have nothing to do with the topic that's in hand. For example, directly in this series of reasoning on my wall, he's trying to say that Thomas Jefferson was pro-modern public education, what we have today. In other words, if we dug up Thomas Jefferson and we vivified him, we brought him back to life, or we time traveled him from there to here, and we gave him a picture of what modern public education is. So we got one of these people who we walk out in the street and we say, who's the vice president of the United States? Who is, and they don't even know. They don't even know. We have, and by the way, public education, as Forbes is describing it, has only existed since the late 1800s, early 1900s, and in most places in our country, it didn't exist at all until the 20s or the 30s. And so I think Jimmy Carter may have been one of the first presidents who grew up under his own entire life under. I could be wrong about that. I don't know. I know he was probably one of the first that was born in a hospital. So this is a very modern concept of public education. The public education we have today, which does not teach the things that Thomas Jefferson personally believed education ought to entail, which included religious education, which included things like general math, science, those type of things, that doesn't exist today. What we have today is a system of government propaganda that teaches and shows children how to function as basically batteries in a system where they don't produce anything, they only consume. And so anybody that wants to snatch somebody off the streets of Boston, no matter who they are in the 1840s, and wants to snatch somebody off the streets of Boston today and give them a general test of intelligence are going to be very, very shocked to find that most of the people who they would snatch off the streets today can't even, would not even have passed a 7th grade level test that existed in the 1840s. And this is very simple for you to prove. You don't have to take my word for it. Just get on the internet and do searches on tests that were given to children in the early 1900s or the late 1800s as compared to tests that are given them today. My only point in saying that is that there is no way, zero way, that Thomas Jefferson, in his quote about public education, was supportive of what we have today in modern public education. Neither is it even apropos to the point. The point that government is engaging in propaganda, Russian-style propaganda, which means there's a thing they want to accomplish. What do we want to accomplish? We want the widespread acceptation of something, whether it's vaccines or whatever it is. And what we're going to do is we're going to handpick information that's going to come from corporations that have been personally picked by the government, who are engaged in government grants, who are engaged in government financing, who are corporations that were formed by the government, and whose one of their first and only financial contributions is to the politicians that continue to give them that money. This oligarchical system that we have, this corporate crony corporatism, we're going to pick those people. We're going to handpick the data that they're going to get out, and we're going to use social media and other government manipulated means of education, and we're going to force feed people an idea that we feel like is good for the growing and the strengthening of government power. It's a big difference than I think what Thomas Jefferson was advocating. And so again, we see that this is just dishonest discourse. Poisoning the well. He's captured Thomas Jefferson as his own. Nobody else can use it. If you come in and you pull some quote off the same page from Thomas Jefferson, he's going to say, let's put aside the fact that he was a slaver and that he was a constant rapist. And then he's going to go on. Having already poisoned the well, he relies on the stupidity and the ignorance of the audience. And to me, that's one of the saddest things. And I've told him this personally. It's one of the saddest things in the world to rely on the stupidity of the audience to try to make yourself feel like you won some argument or you won some discussion or debate, when in fact you've engaged in dishonest discourse. You're dishonestly portraying information. All right? So that's the point for today. That's now the Forbes fallacy until we need to change it again. And that is this dishonest use of quotes, the absolute poisoning of the well, and the reliance on the ignorance of the audience in order to try to make yourself feel better about your performance. All right, if anybody has any questions, if you have any topics or any things you want to talk about, put them down in the discussion down below. You can also make suggestions if you'd like to see some of these videos that you would want to do. I would ask all of you, if you appreciate any of this information or if you appreciate these videos, please hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, because we're trying to get subscribers so we can get over 2,000 right now is the number. And also hit the like button. Right next to the subscribe button, there's a little bell icon, and you can click on that. And when you do, you click all. And what that'll do is make sure you get all of the notifications. So when I get go live, you'll get a notification so you can come join us and you can comment in the comment section. I appreciate you guys watching the video. It's been fun. I'll talk to you soon.